to nobody.
Welcome back to Two Nobodies, everyone. Rupesh is here again. Appreciate everyone subscribing and joining us again for another week. I have a really great guest, someone that I've met a long time ago, got to work with, and really appreciate her insights always on this field. Governments are going through challenging times all the time. And last couple of years with the COVID crisis, and there's always all of these kind of different challenges. What is it like for a communications professional to navigate those challenges, to support governments, to support public sector agencies and all that? I always think that's a fascinating challenge, and I have the right person to talk to, Sheri Doyle, who's the founder and owner of Digital Alberta Communications here in Alberta. Sheri, thanks so much for joining Two Nobodies, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rupesh, for having me.
Yeah, appreciate having you. What a interesting challenge the last couple of years with COVID, especially. Like I was at a community event not too long ago, and it feels like everyone is just like COVID has kind of just changed people. Like it's like everyone's like everything's come so much more polarized, and I've always been wondering about like what's the challenge for governments when they're having to communicate in this really polarized environment. But like you were in the thick of it, right? Supporting these governments during COVID. What was that sort of like?
I think it was a challenge because it was something that was completely unprecedented. So when you think about supporting public sector communications, you think about a wildfire situation or a situation that has somewhat of a limited time frame. With COVID, we're looking at a matter of years. So everything from adapting to new technologies, to responding quicker, to structuring communications around how we need to be more responsive. There were a lot of challenges there. And I think that on top of all of that, we had massive shifts in consumer behavior. We had massive shifts in how people want to receive information, people's ability to engage with government, brands, they're downloading, they're streaming, all of that stuff as they're, staying home to kind of avoid the spread. So it was really interesting not only to take a 360 look at the structures of government and how they support these pandemic situations, but also the behavior of the public, the taxpayer, the consumer that all go along with it.
I've always thought that, like, especially the public service in particular, like when a crisis happens, I've always thought that people generally trust the information that's coming out there, especially at a time of crisis. And I found, and this is purely anecdotal, purely sort of suspicion, but like at the start of the crisis, especially the first 3 or 4 months in 2020, like after March 2020, I felt like everyone was on board. Everyone was ready to just follow whatever those guidelines were, follow where government was sort of directing people. And then all of a sudden it was just like everyone started questioning things, and people started questioning the information that was out there and all that. Like, do you think that governments there's still a place that people hold for governments when it comes to like trusting the information after this COVID crisis, I guess?
I think that at the beginning, people were, concerned, curious. They were willing to take steps. But slowly it really started encroaching on people's personal lives. It is one of those things, even when you look at the workplace, like the people working from home and, canceling Christmas dinners, all these things. It was really the home and work and professional life and the government and all that. There was like a blurred line there for a while. So I think that it's going to be a difficult climb to rebuild trust. And I don't think that that's just specific to government. We're seeing stats about how people trust everyone from NGOs to mainstream media to, journalists, CEOs, everything. That trust has dropped significantly. So, I mean, I just have some stats from Edelman. So 52% of Canadians surveyed in 2022, they think that newsrooms are no longer nonpartisan. They're no longer a place to get information. 47% of Canadians are worried now about their rights. And that is
Mm,
a significant leap from previous years.
mm,
So there are definitely some concerns in the general public. 49% of people are worried that technology is now going to take over their
mm.
job because, if anything, and we can talk about this later in
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
podcast, COVID really um, created new venues for technology to make life easier, for
Yeah.
people to be more engaged from their home. But that also created some fears.
Mm.
So I think that there is a little bit of a fear. There's definitely a lack of trust. And that's something that communicators, governments, companies, brands, everyone is going to have to take into consideration when it comes to marketing and communications.
Where do you think that sort of mistrust started to occur? Like, especially when you think about like the media, and like
Mm-hmm.
that's a staggering stat. Like you said, 57% of people, or was 50? Anyways, it was in the 50s or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. As far as people thinking that the news media is nonpartisan anymore, like especially that's where most people used to get their information for the most part. Where do you
Mm-hmm.
think that sort of mistrust started to occur, particularly in Canada, I guess?
I think that there was just so much information and a lot of
Mm,
misinformation. And that was really something that contributed to it. So the lack of trust, I think people were just getting bombarded to the point where they were starting to disengage a little bit.
mm,
Um, that's what I see in this. And when, like I said, it's in your home. It's something that affects you very personally. A pandemic was something that affected Canadian households, affected
mm,
Alberta households. Um, it was something that people had to. You couldn't leave it. And
mm.
especially if you're a communicator, you couldn't leave it at work. You couldn't leave it at home.
Yeah.
So I think that that's something that I think affected people's trust, and
Mm,
they've never experienced something like that. Like I said, it's completely unprecedented and so encompassing. Like everyone had that common experience, and I think that when they start talking to people after about how they feel about trust, people are bringing some of that personal fears and those personal pieces to the table.
mm.
So that's really affecting their trust in it. It's not quite what it used to be.
Do you? I feel like there's a lot of I don't know, and maybe there is a rightful. It's rightful to blame politicians' role in this, politicians' roles in these sort of situations, right? Like Donald Trump always comes up, right, with his attack on media, right? But it's not. I feel like he's not the only politician who politicians blame the media when they don't like things that when there's not good news about them, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not like it's the first time, but what's the role of a politician in creating mistrust? Because I would think like political officials, they need the media to be on their side too, right? Like they want to make sure that when they have a story that wants to go out, like that people believe what the government is saying, right? So it's almost like this push and pull tension between like political officials and the media as far as when it comes to building trust.
Yeah, and I think that communications has changed a lot, and politicians and others need to kind of grab onto that. So
Mm,
I'm an elder millennial, so I started my career in 2007.
mm,
Facebook was new.
mm,
That kind of communication was new. It was very much a top-down communications approach. So we would organize press conferences. We
mm,
would put the minister, up in front,
mm-hmm,
deliver the message, answer the questions. Journalists would take that back to the newsroom, draft a story that went to print. It landed on
mm,
your doorstep the next
mm.
day, kind of
Sure.
thing.
Yeah.
What we've seen drastically happen in the field and in communication and how we receive information in general is we've seen more of a bottom-up approach. So I can, as a communicator, go directly to the taxpayer, directly to the public. I don't need to rely on the filter that comes
Mm,
down. But with that is the need to engage and answer questions and to be more authentic and to be more vulnerable
mm,
because it's now a conversation. So you're in the
mm,
room with these people on these platforms. You're talking to them about the things that matter to them, but you also have to answer those questions. Um, I would like to see more of that. I would like to see more of embracing that type of technology and that directness. And I think during the pandemic, some politicians were successful in hosting Facebook chats, answering questions,
right.
putting themselves out there, talking about their personal experiences, things like that. I
Right.
think that that was something that was successful. But there's still a long way to go in terms of embracing this bottom-up approach
Mm.
where the public can invent the news. The public can send something out that goes viral about a politician. They can talk about topics that are important to them, and it's all in this same space. So we all exist equally. It's like a democracy. Um, the true, online democracy where everyone is a player in the conversation. So um, I think that that's a way for them to build more trust, and look at ways to address that. So
That's an adjustment, right? For governments, if like typically they were sort of the trusted source, but now they're kind of a part of the conversation, right? Like as you said, if the media can access the public more readily rather than that sort of top down approach, that's a different role for politicians and for governments to have to be sort of an equal member in that conversation, right?
yeah, and there are also risks with that.
Mm.
There are vulnerabilities. There is a sort of fear around, it's not a megaphone anymore. It's a
Mm.
conversation. So I'm not holding the megaphone. I'm engaging, and everyone has a megaphone. So it's more of that, and it's really about being able to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think
Mm.
that, when I started in my career, it was just so formulaic and you planned and kind of could control it. But to say that we've been able to control the message for the last 20 years, it's just we haven't
Mm.
been able to control the message. It's
Mm.
about what people are saying about you, and that's really what brand is now, is
Mm.
what people are saying about you, people are saying about your brand. It's not your logo, it's
Mm.
not this, it's not that. So um yeah, I think building that trust is really important, especially now that we see in the statistics that government was the most volatile in terms of trust.
Mm.
So even I was surprised to see NGOs losing trust.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was everyone across the board is a loser. But I did see government being the most volatile, and the higher you go, the less people trust you, right?
Yeah.
So your
Yeah.
city councilors would probably be more trusted than the prime minister in terms of the information that's going out.
Mm.
Another thing I want to mention
Mm.
too is that the rush to get the information out now. So we have mainstream journalists, we have, CTV, CBC, everyone's online. They're
Yeah.
posting their stories. Twitter, especially, is sort of now there's a competition to see who can get the information out quicker. And it's fast and it's very quick. So there's a lot less fact checking. I mean, there's no ability at some points just to say things that are happening,
Yeah.
to fact check those things. So it does create that risk of everyone spreading misinformation. So that is another thing that to consider when we look at all of these tools in the digital landscape.
There's a couple of things I want to talk about. What maybe just to build off of that. So, am I hearing newsrooms and media organizations? There's less now capacity, or is it less capacity for folks to really dive deep into things, or is it just not a willingness or a desire to dive deep into things? Like you see so much more opinion based news, right, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to actual like analytical news and that sort of thing. Is that a conscious effort, or is that just an erosion of actual professional capacity?
I think there's a difference between just straight up reporting and journalism.
Mm.
And we need journalism. We
Mm.
need investigative reporting. We need deep dives. We need
Yeah.
people that are going to take time to get to the root of problems and report those problems.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, I've worked in not just digital, but media relations. And when I started, that was it. Like you called and pitched and you were fielding media calls all day.
Mm.
Newsrooms are stretched really thin. Small rural publications have shuttered.
Mm.
So there is still a role for a lot of that communication. Um, but it is, yeah, it's definitely been stretched thin. And I have noticed that some media companies are using advertising, selling advertising as a huge piece to make up for some
Mm.
of that funding. But less people, again, are even reading, like e publications has gone
Mm.
down.
Mm.
So, even trying to move newspapers to new types of formats that are more friendly. Um, Tablets use, laptop use has dropped. Smartphone use has skyrocketed. Like
Mm.
everything is changing again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a constant fight, constant adjustment to uh, engage and find the right business
Yeah.
business model.
Yeah.
And I think it's been a struggle for journalists. It's sad because in Canada, we've had fantastic reporting, really great in-depth reporters. So I'm hoping that there will be more of that continuation. And I do think that podcasting is an opportunity to still do those deep dives and still do those investigations. So I'm hoping that the audio part will
Mm.
invigorate that again, and it'll just be a different format to discuss the topics of the day.
Yeah, for sure. So the other thing that you said was politicians kind of need to be vulnerable, maybe I'm misunderstanding that. But like we think about, we hear more and more in leadership about how leaders need to be more vulnerable, right? Or like vulnerability is an important part of leadership. I'm just thinking about like I just can't see how politicians or governments can be that. Like, so maybe help me understand what you mean by when you talked about vulnerability.
I think it's like I said, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. So um, we have to go where the public is. We have
Mm,
to go and communicate with them where they are.
mm,
And if we have the average person spending 2.5 hours a day on social media,
mm,
we have to meet them where they are, and social media is a way to do that. And the way to
mm,
be on social media is to be engaging, whether that's a Reddit AMA, it's a live chat. You have to be okay with getting uncomfortable questions, not holding the megaphone, that kind of
mm,
thing. And I think that they are warming up to the idea. I think that COVID was a catalyst for that. Not only are politicians engaging on social media, but we also saw how news conferences became more of like a public domain thing.
mm,
So, we had to live stream updates. Uh, COVID updates are live streamed, wildfire updates are now live streamed
mm.
with sign interpreters, all of that.
Yeah.
So it used to just be focused on media, but now it's broadcast on YouTube. Tens of thousands of Albertans, for
Mm-hmm.
example, or people from New Brunswick are tuning into their local COVID-19 updates.
Mm,
So again, they're not necessarily getting the top-down communication from the media. They're with the media, listening to their questions or tuning into the press conferences. So that itself is also an opportunity to change the way that press conferences are done, for example, because we
mm,
know that the public is also tuning in. So it's not just about answering the media's questions, it's also about speaking to the public as well. So that's another thing. Uh, Live chats are huge. So they're
mm,
getting more and more popular. I have seen them poorly done. I've seen them well done. So I think a couple years ago, well, many years ago now, Kathleen Wynne was the Premier of Ontario. She
mm,
hosted a Reddit AMA. I think they got to 10 questions in an hour. It was too slow. It was too vetted. It wasn't organic. It wasn't
mm,
vulnerable. So not responding is a response, unfortunately. Not responding quick enough is a response.
mm,
So if you're going to do those things, you do them right. And so that's something I think people need to learn. One thing, though, that's challenging is communicators are still having a challenge showing the value of digital tools and social media and the tools
mm,
we need to be more vulnerable. I think that 30%. I had a presentation with
yeah.
Meltwater, and yeah, about 30% of communicators are still having to argue with senior management about the value of digital tools and social media. So not quite there yet. I think it's all about embracing innovation, embracing vulnerability, embracing technology, which is really what it's about when it comes to reaching these large swaths of people who are at home and using different
Mm.
devices. So it's a bunch of things.
Why are they still resisting these kind of digital tools?
I think that there is a lack of understanding of a lot of
Mm,
it, and it's knowing how it's worked for so long that
mm,
people are just stuck on that. I think there needs to be more diverse voices in this space, diverse hires in public sector environments. So, I'm
mm,
not picking on any government in particular, but hiring marketers, hiring people who are bringing technology skills, making sure that ideas are king. Governments aren't always structured that way, so
Mm.
um, it can be siloed. So I am happy to see chief digital officers popping up in provincial governments
Mm.
across Canada. So looking at ways to make products more accessible, looking at ways to engage more with the public. So I think that it's happening, but it will take time, and it's not a choice.
Yeah. How do you engage in that sort of rapid format like live chat but still be come off as authentic, right?
Yeah, I think it's preparation, understanding what the issues
Mm.
are. You should know what the public's talking about, right?
Mm.
And that's an important piece as well. Technology definitely helps with that. We've been able to use machine learning for years to scan public conversations, find out what
Mm.
the key issues are, what people want to talk about. Again, that's de-siloing the government, de-siloing. Social media managers talk to correspondence managers, talk to frontline workers who are on the
Mm.
uh, call center phones. Everyone's talking. Everyone has an idea of what the issues are of the day. That's reported up,
Mm.
and there's things bubbling, right? So
Mm.
these structures are a little bit of that canary in a coal mine that will tell you what's happening. And I think that opening up the lines of communication broader instead of sort of siloing them is definitely a way that governments can look at feeding and feeding up um, what the issues are of the day. I think if politicians can speak to what people care about, then that's half the battle. And to know what people are caring about, you need to embrace technology.
Yeah, yeah. You're talking about how, especially during COVID, you'd see a lot of these chief medical officers of health on like speaking live to the public,
Mm-hmm.
or the premiers, or all these political officials.
Mm-hmm.
There was so much access during like the height of COVID, right? Every day there was an update, right? Or um, is that time over? Like, do governments not want to go back to these kind of um, I mean, you did say like these kind of live updates are still here, but is that something that they don't want to go back to, or you think that that is kind of the new way of exchanging information with the media and the public?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that we could take from the pandemic and apply to future communications.
Mm.
Um, I don't think anyone's in a position to want to go back to pandemic, you know, staying at home and all of that stuff and not being
Yeah.
able to travel and things like that. So again, it was a real effect on lives. But I do think that there were things that communicators did that would be great to continue to do. So I think now that live streaming a press conference is a pretty standard thing, especially if the premier is involved.
Mm.
That may or may not have been the case before, but people are subscribing to YouTube channels, getting their
Yeah.
notifications, watching what's going on in the province. They could be more engaged that way.
Mm.
A lot of things, everything from the education system to e-health, everything was changed as a result of that. So
Mm.
uh, more events are hosted online. That increases accessibility, so that is a positive thing, right? People who can't make
Mm.
it out to events, they can participate in a different way. They're in a different city. It opens up communications to a broader swath of people, and I think that that is an important piece for that. Um, People will just continue to publicly consume information on digital and social media. That
Yeah.
increased during the pandemic. So again, we're looking at how
Mm.
do we communicate more effectively on these platforms as they continue to increase and increase and increase.
Yeah.
Everything from streaming to podcasting, audio. I think 16% of people globally
Mm.
have 16% increase of folks that have purchased those in-home devices.
Mm.
So your Alexa, your Google Home, that kind of stuff during the pandemic. So
And are people getting news from these things? Like, or
mhm.
do you know if people are? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they're getting news from it. They're engaging with it. It does change everything from how we search for things. So
Mm.
um, I've had both Google and Alexa. So
Yeah.
I'd ask it to find me information on a topic, and it's searching for the best source for that. So that also
Mm.
changes how audio is a big thing.
Mm.
That's king, and it
Yeah.
does change how we will receive information, how websites are written and things like that, if
Mm-hmm.
they're written for audio and that kind of thing. That's also an important piece as we have an aging population. We have people who want more
Yeah.
accessible information. We have the convenience of it. So these are all things that change as a result of the pandemic. These are all consumer behaviors that have changed as a result of the pandemic. So it's important to understand those things as a communicator so that we can adjust and make sure that we continue to do a lot of those things, including governments and politicians.
Is there still a place for the traditional town hall? I mean, if you remember a few years ago, the prime minister went around the country and did all those town halls, and I went to the one here in Edmonton. I thought it was kind of cool, but like, is there still a place for those sort of things? Do you think, or
Yeah, I think there's definitely an appetite for public, especially post pandemic, for the public to get
yeah,
together. And I think that that is more like community building. Anyone who works on a campaign will tell you it's knocking on doors that gets votes. It's not
yeah,
Facebook ads
yeah,
and all that stuff.
yeah,
So I do believe that when it comes to political campaigning, like you got to get into these towns. You've got to go meet people. You've
mm-hmm,
got to knock on doors.
mm-hmm,
There's definitely still a place for all of that. I think now what we've seen is just more of a hybrid model is acceptable. I think people got sick of Zoom calls, so they didn't necessarily
mm-hmm,
want to get off work and go do Zoom events every night, but to have a little bit of a mix of in person and
mm-hmm.
not. So whether that's a consultation government's doing, or if it's something in the nonprofit sector, like a
Yeah,
festival or like LitFest or an event,
mm.
anything could be, half online, half in person. But I think there's still, like I said, I appreciate digital tools. I work in this space, but we need journalism. We need in person
Mm.
events. We still need to do that for human connection, and it's still effective.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so you think about the traditional way of communicating, these town halls. What are the upcoming disruptors that you see in this space? Like, what's not on people's radar, but that's going to disrupt the way governments and public sector agencies communicate with the public? Like, what does that look like?
Well, I think artificial intelligence is something that is starting and has been
Mm,
um, working its way into communications tools. So I think
mm,
we need to release the idea that a public sector communicator or someone is an expert and just see them as someone who is constantly evolving and learning about these new tools and maybe more of an expert on what's new. So
mm,
I know that the old PR sort of stereotype is the person who just knows what to say. They know what to say in
mm,
front of the camera. It's a little bit different now. It's more about understanding what's next, understanding what the trends are, understanding what people are talking about, and being able to craft content. Chat GPT, I mean, that's just taking the web by storm right now, and it
mm.
is a great way for content creators to um, write engaging content. I know that if you are a small business owner and you don't have any resources, you're able to enter your engaging content and it'll flip you back, three or four tweets that are similar to the stuff that was high
Yeah.
performing so you can continue to push that stuff out. Um, the only issue with chat GPT, and I think that governments and people will have to be mindful of it, is it does pull the information from the internet. There are plagiarism
Mm,
issues, there are
mm.
factual issues. So um, that's
Might
something.
be a good starting spot, maybe. I don't know.
I think so. I think it's a way
Yeah,
to, if you're stuck, you got writer's block, you got to do something.
yeah.
I hope that I'm still here in 5 years, that the robots haven't taken my job, but
That was my next question.
yeah.
Like, how are you feeling about the use of something like ChatGPT and AI? And yeah,
I think that it's about shifting your focus as somebody who can create something as opposed to somebody who understands the tools that create things. So
mm-hmm,
it's important to, of course, be a creator. It's important to be a writer, but it's also important to understand and be aware of the tools that can also assist you to do those things.
mm,
And that goes back to just constantly being aware of the evolution of it. Like Shutterstock, everyone knows Shutterstock. They create
mm-hmm,
photos. They have a Shutterstock AI program now, and it is
mm-hmm,
pretty cool. You can talk about your key message, your campaign, and it will find you the right design. for
Right.
that. I mean, I think that there's no stopping something like that, especially for content creators like you, Rupesh, who wants to design something beautiful, but doesn't have a
Yeah.
designer on staff and things
Yeah.
like that. But people will have to review this stuff. We have to be mindful of the plagiarism. So it'll be interesting to see where a lot of it goes. We also have, obviously short form video is massive. So TikTok's big.
Mm.
It's the big
Yeah.
thing right now. So when we look
Yeah.
at Synesthesia is another AI app. So that allows you
Mm.
to, if you want to create a person,
Mm.
you can go through a catalog of people, you write in what they want you to say, you can pick and choose genders, ethnicities, hairstyles, like whatever. And that person will get up on a video, TikTok video, and talk about your program. So we talk
Mm.
about influencers and the role of influencers.
Yeah.
These are digital influencers. Like they are not real. They are
That's scary as heck, man.
they don't quite look. There's a little bit of, yeah,
Yeah.
this is, it's they don't quite look natural,
Yeah.
but we're getting
But
there.
how people buy into that sort of thing? They know it. Like, do people know that these are digital influencers? Like, they're not real, or
I don't know if you have to be transparent about that right now. I know that
yeah.
when influencer marketing started with actual influencers, like live people,
Mm.
at first, there was no laws in place where you had to disclose that you were selling a particular product. So you were standing there with
Mm.
a Bud Light and you didn't have to tell anybody. Now in
Mm.
Canada, there are laws where you have to disclose the fact that it's a paid partnership. They even say, like, you can say paid partnership, stuff like that.
Right.
Um, I don't know how that works because you could also just be a content creator using it not to sell a product, right? But you could
Yeah.
use that person as the face of the company or something like that.
Mm.
Um, there are digital influencers. South Korea has a beauty influencer. She is beautiful, fashionable, awesome, hundreds of thousands of followers. She's not real. Very popular. She is, and then they disclose that. They're saying, she's a world renowned digital influencer and she sells products and people buy them. So
Like,
influencing.
what does she? How? What does she? Sorry, what does she do exactly?
She sells products. I'll find her name for you.
Okay. Yeah.
But she sells beauty, fashion, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, she's a digital influencer. She's not a real person, Rupesh.
And how that influence? I don't understand how that influences people. Like that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
So that's
Have you played around? Have you played around with well, you talked about Shutterstock AI. I've played around with like Mid Journey and InstaArt and all that sort of thing. It is it is like wild what you can create in such a short amount of time. But the other thing that's scary but also upsetting is just like if you type like I don't know person doing yoga and you say beautiful person, it like AI will spit out what it thinks a beautiful person will look like,
yeah.
right? And so that that's really upsetting to me. But
Yeah, and it can
yeah,
be used for negative things like that. Like we won't know the
yeah,
impacts right away, but also I'm thinking as someone who writes creatively for
mm,
businesses and companies to think about them chat GPT, they'll scour the internet, but they're going to find a lot of jargon. They're going to find a lot of
mm-hmm,
like well written, but not creatively well written necessarily. It'll be stuff
mm,
that people are saying a lot, repetitive language, so not necessarily overly original thought. So I think there'll
mm,
always be that sort of piece. So we've got designers now, writers like me, we've got influencers. You know, I chose those three examples just because those
mm,
affect those three spaces. So I think it's about working with understanding the technologies, working with them, but also finding out what your value proposition is going to be when it comes to understanding and using those. Because everyone I know who works in social media uses a platform for monitoring or
mm-hmm,
whatever, or content scheduling, calendar, all of those things. They are now integrating the chat GPT into a lot of those platforms so that as you're drafting and planning out for the week your content, you can use that as a way to help. So
mm,
it's something to both celebrate and fear, I think, in a little bit.
yeah,
I don't know if
yeah,
the robot overlords are completely taking over, but There are ways you can use it to help and to use it to your advantage.
How are you feeling about the ban of TikTok on government devices, and not necessarily the security piece, obviously, but more so about just, like you said, like these shorts are kind of king as well right now, and there are a lot of politicians who've been using TikTok as a way of engaging their audiences, and so, yeah, how do you feel about whether governments and politicians are going to be missing out on a key demographic?
Well, I that is my concern, but I think
Yeah.
that if there are security concerns, which clearly they have stated that there are, um, having it on government phones is one thing, but understanding the importance of it is another. So
Mm,
I think that it's one thing to just say, you know what, we shouldn't use this on these particular phones, but I think it's still something that uh, government should be aware of. It's blowing up. It's huge. It'll be
mm,
interesting about using it for the election because I'm just thinking,
mm,
how are you gonna, if you want to engage with young people, how are you gonna do that without using this platform? So there may be ways around it. Um, but again, it's my thing, and a big part of my job is talking to a lot of senior leaders about social media and stuff. And it's not about understanding how every single platform works, but it is about understanding the importance and the growth of the
mm,
platforms. So there might be some FOMO there when it comes
mm,
to election time and engaging with the youth.
mm,
But I'm wondering if parties can use it because
mm.
technically that's not government. So
Yeah,
um, just thinking about parties like the NDP who might want to reach younger voters or
sure.
people like that. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's a ban. It's gone. Like it's cross country thing right now.
It and so do you know the number of users like for TikTok compared to, because you can do shorts for, like, you can do YouTube shorts, you can do obviously do shorter videos for on
Mhm.
Instagram. Like is just TikTok, like their base is just so much larger? Like can't you just engage on a different platform and still get the same kind of reach, or not really?
Well, it's definitely the fastest growing right now. But
Mm.
as you probably see, a lot of them cross post. So I
Yeah,
use
yeah, yeah,
Instagram
yeah.
a lot. It's my
Mm,
favorite. And I get
mm,
TikTok posts on it constantly and Reels. So a lot of the
yeah.
platforms have started moving to a similar model. So Reels, everything like that, to kind of mimic that short form video stuff that TikTok's has been doing. And that has allowed creators to cross over. So if you don't want TikTok, you probably will still be looking at, like, I don't know, you could scroll through and see like 50 TikToks because they're just cross
Mm,
posting. Um, but TikTok's not slowing down anytime soon, so it'll be interesting to
mm,
see how um, people are engaging with it and whether or not you can advertise on it without having accounts and things like that, like just sort of those
mm,
walkarounds that Instagram used to have. You didn't used to have an Instagram account to actually advertise on Instagram. I'm wondering if TikTok is you can get a buying agency to put stuff up there without it actually having to exist in a government server.
yeah. Do you think TikTok actually changes its ways? I mean, it's only this is a small loss for them, right? Even if it's all provincial and federal
Mm-hmm.
government users, like that's not really a ton of users that they're losing. Does this potentially change the way TikTok? Um, yeah, I don't know. Do they take this seriously? You think, or
I think it depends on the demographics, but if the business community and
mm,
starts to do it the same way, it may affect them a little bit more, make them pay
mm,
attention. But
mm,
it's the young people's game on that, and I don't think they really care right now.
yeah, yeah. This is, yeah. It's a fascinating time for
It
sure.
is.
Um, what was I going to ask you? I was going to ask you about uh, just, you started your business, Digital Owl. Like, didn't you start in the midst of like the COVID piece, or was it before there?
Well, I started it in 2017. So
Okay, so just
yeah, I
before.
was still working full time. I wanted to do a bit of a side gig. I had been volunteering, working in nonprofit. I was working with
Yeah.
LitFest Alberta. I was busy with social media on a volunteer basis, and then people started saying, "Hey, can you do a social strategy for me? Can you make a
Mm,
Facebook page for me?" And I thought, you know what, like I have to get a business license to do this. So I
Yeah.
started a side gig company. So something I did on like evenings and weekends. Like I would go to events and do things like that.
Mm,
Um, and it was something I could do on my own time. I went on maternity leave and
mm,
just kind of started thinking about it. Went back to a government job, and I thought,
mm,
if I could, maybe I can make a go of this. So I worked in
mm,
government for another year.
mm.
And started getting more and more offers for contracts. So I couldn't do
Cool.
both, obviously. So yeah, I
Mm,
just I left and I've been working full time the business since 2021. So I had the opportunity to work in government during the pandemic. It was that
yeah.
experience, and I wouldn't have had, I don't think, a lot of the experience I have now if I hadn't have done some of that disaster response stuff, which was just really fascinating. So yeah, so now I like to call my business sort of a cross-platform communications. I have worked in all levels of communications over the years and have kind of seen that evolution. So while I
Mm,
understand digital tools, everything from blogging, etc., I also work in traditional media, video, that kind of stuff too.
yeah.
So I think it's important for clients to consider all types of things when they want to communicate and with who they want to communicate.
Where are clients mostly wanting your support on these days?
I'm doing a lot of general communications. So what I've noticed over the past few years
Mm,
is that the specializations are they're kind of broadening. So you used to hire when I used to be a social media specialist. I managed social media. People know I managed social media for the GOA for a while and the team there.
mm,
And as things got more and more, uh, as social media and digital tools become more mainstream, they're an expectation now. So
yeah.
you if you're a communications person coming into the field now, I've noticed a lot of the students, people coming out of school, they are already in this. They already know how to use the tools. They are really good and great at
Mm,
blogging, creating really engaging content. They can go on Canva and design things. They can do all kinds of things. So I think it's just kind of part of the field now. So I'll work on an announcement, but I'll help them make that digital friendly. So I'm working with
mm,
reporters, I'm organizing a press conference, but we're making sure that we're doing video content, we're doing interviews, we're creating like our own
mm,
newsroom. We're doing some engaging blogging on it. We're working with e-newsletters. If there's a community Facebook page that we can engage with, we will engage with that community to share information. So it's really like this holistic idea that every piece is important to your strategy, and I just want to get people thinking about that a bit more. What don't we know? Who's not in the
yeah.
room? It's about being curious now as opposed to having all the answers, and every time I do something
Mm,
it's an opportunity to do something a bit different. So I'm booking people on podcasts. Before they just wanted to talk
mm,
to reporters, but CBC has podcasts and you have a podcast and
mm,
a lot of people have podcasts. So
mm,
helping book, you know, economic development folks on a podcast that talks about the business landscape in Calgary with,
mm,
5,000 downloads a month, but it's a very
mm,
perfect audience for that material. So I like to see more of that. I like to see more exploration,
mm.
and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to explore. I'm learning every day. So
You could have. I've heard people who they said they just consume their news through podcasts because there's such a better exchange of information, and you can, it's not just short sound bites. You can really dig deep into things, and yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How was it like as just an entrepreneur and starting a business? Like, what were the challenges for you?
I think for me, I wanted to create a little bit of a safety net for
Mm-hmm.
myself. So I started slow. I realized that I've positioned myself as more of a communicator that focuses a lot on the public sector. So that was a little bit of a niche for
Mm-hmm.
me. I always love working in the public sector, love the experiences, and I feel like it's a different kind of communication in some ways as opposed to selling
Mm-hmm.
product. It's also about building communities less
Mm-hmm.
focused. So I thought I could make a go of this. There's lots of clients I could work
Yeah.
with, and I could work with governments, right? So I wanted to do projects, impact driven, just work on projects
Mm-hmm.
specific. I think consulting was a good thing for that. So I took the time to build a client list over the
Yeah.
years. Then I went and did the full-time
Yeah.
thing. So it was a lot of hours at the beginning, sort of building that. But I would, challenge folks to think about what they're good
Mm.
at and how they can jump in and do something like that, even if it's on the
Yeah.
side.
Where do you hope Digital Al goes?
I am kind of wondering about that in terms of
Yeah.
growth.
Yeah.
I've had a couple years now on the job full time, so I'm always learning how to balance um, work, money, impact, family,
Mm-hmm.
all of those things. I would like to build a
Mm.
team eventually,
Are
and
you on your
once
own
I
right now?
have, I am on
Yeah.
my own right
Yeah.
now. Yeah, so it's nice. I'm a team of one. I get to pick
Yeah.
and choose my day, but I think it's an opportunity too to help grow other
Yeah.
communicators. So I would like to see it grow a little bit in the next couple
Yeah.
of years.
Yeah. And then I think you said you're a mom as well, like just balancing family life. How's that going then?
I think for me, going on maternity leave, I had time to think about what I wanted to do,
Yeah.
and the business was always something that made me really
Mm.
happy. And yeah, it made me happy, and I wanted to continue it. And I knew that I would have a bit more flexibility to be home with my
Yeah.
daughter. So I get to work from home a lot. I get to spend more time with her. I don't have to commute as far. So I think that those things have all been great. You could travel when you want to.
Mm.
I can yank my computer and take it with me if I needed to go
Yeah.
somewhere. So it's great. It's been great balancing. My work-life balance may not be like everybody else's. Mine is sort of I work when I need to. I don't work when I don't need
Mm.
to. I think a lot of communicators, it's sometimes it's a crunch. Sometimes you have time to breathe. So you just ride the waves. And if you're okay doing that, then I think the consultant life's okay if you're willing to like ride those
Mm.
waves. And I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it, and it's been working really well for me and my family right
Yeah.
now.
Um, your child's probably close to the same age as my daughter, who's about 5. What's she into?
Oh, she's really into STEM stuff,
Really?
which is like I am not. So I'm encouraging that. She wants to be a veterinarian.
Okay.
She's into math
Yeah. Yeah.
and animals and just medical stuff. And I don't know, is that because she was like a COVID baby? Like
Yeah.
I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't. Yeah, I don't know if because they're so into the medical field and
Mm.
vaccines and all of these
Mm.
things. I mean, maybe that's a good thing.
Mm.
We're getting the next generation of doctors out. But she likes unicorns
Mm-hmm. That's still a thing for my daughter
and
too. Unicorns.
creative stuff. Oh, they love
Yeah.
unicorns and Paw
Yeah.
Patrol and all that. So yeah. What about you?
She's. I mean, we do give her her hour of TV every day. So she watches Bluey. She loves Bluey. That's a big. Have you seen that show? It's actually quite funny.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a big
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
So she watches the shows, but she loves to do a lot of role playing. She's very creative and imaginative, and that's how we spend our time together. So yeah, it's precious. I love being a dad, and it's a lot of fun. It's like a huge leadership challenge, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Is she in kindergarten
She's gonna
now?
start kindergarten. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Same. It's like crazy,
Yeah.
right?
Does your I had somebody about a couple years ago talk to this person about the microbiome, and she said her biggest fear is that like that kids will who've gone through this COVID experience will end up fearing germs. Like you shouldn't fear germs, right? Like it's yes, you should wash your hands, you should be cognizant of all those things, but germs are an important part of your microbiome development and all that sort of thing. How's your daughter with that sort of thing? Like, is she cognizant about that, or is she this hasn't affected her much?
She knows about the good germs and the bad
Mm.
germs. She's really into parasites and reading books about those types of
Okay, she's
things
into
now.
it. Like,
She's into
yeah,
it. She doesn't mind getting
yeah.
needles. I think
Wow.
because she's seen us get so many. How many needles have we all gotten in the last
Mm.
couple of years? And yeah, she is brave around that type of
Wow.
stuff. But yeah, she has an interest in it. She likes to watch little shows about it and that. But yeah, I think they're learning about that in daycare and stuff
Yeah.
too. It's like, wash your hands, but good germs and bad germs. And well, we see how sick they all got when they all, all went back, and feels like there's a cold in the house every
All the
two
time.
weeks. But
All the time.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what are some disasters that you've seen? Like you talked about Kathleen Wynne and that, like, I don't know if that would you say that was a disaster, but like, what are some, I mean, if you want to name names, fair, but if you don't, that's fine too. But like, what are some disasters that you've seen from maybe the use of digital communications that just like, you'd always advise not to go down that direction?
Oh my. Well, I've seen everything from upside down videos to, poor live streams. Live streams are always the one where you have to be really careful.
Mm,
You have to be really prepared. You have to have a good team. I could name other names, but a lot of it is usually in a live environment.
mm,
You have to be prepared and open to receiving any type of information.
mm,
You can't not take questions. You can't
mm,
not. It's just like it would be with a regular town hall. So I have seen those go south, I
mm,
think. I think because people underestimate um, how they work and how to make them work. So there are successful ways to set them up and non-successful ways to set them up. Those are the ones that I think are the rough ones and the hard ones. And the AMAs, and it's there forever,
mm,
right? The AMAs. So you need to really prepare yourself for those. I've seen successful AMAs. Barack Obama was actually really
mm,
good at them. Did great AMAs.
mm,
They were responsive. They were quick. Might be easier because you don't have to talk about really drilled
mm,
down specific stuff. Um, so there's good and bad. I've seen a lot of poor responses from companies. Companies need to not get so defensive when it comes to customer
mm,
service. So most people use Twitter. Consumers use Twitter for customer service
mm,
or to get responses. I've seen them not respond, which, like I said, is a response to pretty crazy
mm.
things, and also poor taste, tweets that are in poor taste. So it's always important to make sure that you are sharing information that is, you can be funny, but don't do it in poor taste. I've seen really bad, a Veterans Day sale to die for, like just, bad
Mm,
content all around. So you got to have a strategy. You got to have people looking over your stuff. You got to figure out what the goal of it is,
mm,
and you've got to plan, plan, plan.
mm,
And also, if you do something wrong, you have to have responses in place for
mm,
that. I've seen people just ignoring things, and then they blow up, and then they've got to hire a PR firm to go ahead and handle
mm.
it because they said something on Twitter that might get them fired.
Yeah.
And when an apology would have done, or when someone says to you, I feel like this about this government and I don't like this and that. You know what? Sometimes people just want to be heard
Mm-hmm.
and they want, thank you for taking the time to write me.
Mm-hmm.
We appreciate your feedback. We're definitely going to pass it along. Um, that part of it, I think we get excited about launching campaigns, but we don't get excited about talking to people about
Mm.
them or taking their feedback and adjusting it. And, it's a real test bed for how effectively we're communicating, and we should be embracing that,
Yeah.
not avoiding it, not responding, that kind of thing.
Do you think there's a place you
Yeah.
talked about like in some cases an apology would do is like do politicians and political officials do they have the ability like do they have the luxury of apologizing these days? I feel like it's not well received or and I wish they would I wish like I wonder if they want to in some cases, but they know that it's just going to go south. Or is there a way of doing it in the proper way? Because I think about like a different era, a different time, but I think about the stakes of this situation, like when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. I don't know if you like if you ever studied or looked at this period, but John Kennedy made a real grave mistake at one point. And he talked about that openly, and he said and he apologized and he recognized his role, and his poll numbers went through the roof after that, right? And it's like when you're talking about a grave situation where like Armageddon is about to happen, and you admit that, and you can and people see your authenticity and they see your genuine apology and they understand that, and your polls go through. Like why wouldn't people do more of that?
I think traditionally it's just been easier to fire one of your staff and blame it on them.
Yeah,
I mean, we see that all the time.
yeah,
Oh, that was something the office did.
yeah.
That wasn't something the PM did. That was the office. That wasn't the politician.
Mm,
And they're sort of creating that buffer between the mistake in the
mm,
office and the politician.
mm,
But I agree. I agree that they have been well received, these authentic
mm,
apologies. depending on how grave the issue
Mm,
is. I think JFK could have got around. He could have got away with a lot more
mm,
than I think the average politician.
mm,
But I think it's less common. It's less common. I do remember during the pandemic, though, the Premier Jason Kenney at the time, he was talking and apologizing to businesses
mm,
because of the restrictions. The restrictions weren't affecting the Walmarts,
mm,
but they were affecting the small
mm,
businesses, the amount of people that were allowed
mm,
into a business, for
mm,
example. So to get up and apologize and make changes for that, I think the changes were good,
mm,
because they started, making some significant changes so that businesses weren't punished as
mm.
much. But that was detrimental to business. So to recognize that and apologize for that, that's rare.
Yeah.
That's rare, to be vulnerable. But that is vulnerability and authenticity, and talking right straight to somebody is not a choice anymore. So
What do you mean
maybe
by
you can
that?
avoid it. Well, because of the way that we communicate now, the
Mm,
way that the tools are. Controlling the message is not up to you. The message is not up to you. Your brand's not up to you.
mm.
It's what people are saying about you. And if you want to be part of that conversation, you have to join it in an authentic way. You can't create your own room and say, if you want to talk to me, you got to come into this room. And
Does that
you
apply
go to a
to
party.
everybody, or are there some people who can still control that message? And yeah,
I don't think so. I don't
interesting.
think that controlling the message should be part of communication strategy.
Oh,
I think
okay.
delivering the message and seeing what sticks and doing the research and figuring out all that, but thinking that you can control how people feel, think,
Mm.
easily in a world where everyone's talking and engaging and misinformation is being shared, that's that's just not the case.
Mm.
It's not the case.
You said how sometimes or no response is also a response. And I think about like if I wonder if sometimes there's when there's too much over communication, and we talked about trust and just like the credibility and integrity of what people say, if there's too much communication, could that devalue what people are saying rather than sort of you know uh, communicating with purpose and not necessarily over communicating, but having the right timing, communicating with purpose, and not reserving your comments for when it really matters, right? Like I wonder if there's still a place for that, right? And I thought actually like Stephen Harper was really good for that. Like he didn't have too many media events, and he would get criticized for that, right? But then when he did speak, he got the attention, right? Because people knew that, okay, there was something important that he had to say. And
Hmm.
I wonder if there's still a place for that, because I've heard you say, well, you got to be in there, you got to be engaging. And so I wonder if just the words are become devalued, and then that also contributes to sort of mistrust and credibility.
Yeah, I think there's news and there's the way that we want to communicate with people and let them know what's happening, because governments have a duty to communicate. They
Mm-hmm.
have to
Mm-hmm.
communicate good or bad
Right.
information.
Right.
But then there's also that customer service aspect of it. And I tend to find that people do one or the other, really, really well.
Mm.
So governments can be really good at getting information out to people because they have those followings and they're really good at it. But then they forget about the aftermath of that, the questions they get around that, answering, just straight up answering the questions of the people in the communities. No spin, no sell.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the real world implications of those types of things. And like I said, if Stephen Harper had a press conference today, there would be probably citizens tuning in,
Mm-hmm.
watching, tens of thousands of them locally, maybe more because it's the prime minister,
Mm-hmm.
watching and listening to what was said, and then looking for answers afterwards. Where do they go to get those answers? So it's sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
so we can get the information, and we also want to be able to communicate and, get our questions answered as well. And I think that it's a challenge. It's a challenge for sure. And I don't think people should just be on the tools for no reason, because that's also not it. But my thing is that communicating with purpose means that if you are going to engage in these platforms, you need to know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
it means the whole package. It means you need to be responsive. It means you need to have a game plan for when it goes south, or you need to know how to talk to people about it. You need to find answers for taxpayers on these particular items, and you need to adjust your campaigns based on the feedback. That's a relationship.
Yeah.
Right? That's not the megaphone that you so don't go in with that. And that's still a work in progress. As a consultant, as someone who has worked in digital communications in larger organizations, it's still a process to convince people that that's the way to do it. But that is a way to do it. It's a holistic thing. You know, you're building community, you're communicating with community, and working with other communities.
Yeah. You're toying around with the idea of a podcast yourself, right?
I am, yeah. So a friend of mine, we're looking at launching this in April.
Yeah.
So it's a podcast about personal branding.
Okay.
So it's called Demythifying Brand. So we are looking at hosting conversations around what personal brand is. Your brand is not your job, right? Like you have your own brand that's above and beyond your day-to-day job. Your podcast has a brand. People have their own branding. They have their things that make them unique, things that make them tick. What influences the brand? How do you present brands? So we want to talk to coaches, professional coaches. We want to talk to marketing folks. We want to talk to people that work in tech, people across all walks of life, because, you know, the way you were raised is a big part of your brand.
Yeah.
So we want to just break open that conversation about brand and personal branding, and also have some sort of work within the podcast on helping people develop their brand statements and stuff like that. So that's launching in April. We do have an Instagram page set up, but we haven't gone full tilt yet with everything. But stay tuned for that, and I will be all over my socials with it as well.
That's pretty cool. Do you see this as an ongoing podcast, or more of a multi sort of episode and move on, or what do you think?
Right now we're planning it as a series.
Yeah.
We did plan it as a series with maybe 5 episodes, but now we've just got so much. There's so much we can dive into that I think what we're gonna do is do like multiple seasons or series. We've got our space ready. Our recording space ready. Yeah, we're gonna work with Northwest College.
Okay.
They're gonna work with us, and so that's really exciting.
Yeah.
So that stuff's good. We've designed our pieces, but yeah, we really need to dive into the scripting and, you know, all that stuff, and the pre-interviews and getting the guests booked. But we've got a great roster, so I'm really excited to launch that.
That's exciting.
This spring.
That's exciting.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Shall we pivot to the 2 questions I ask every guest?
Of course.
All
yeah,
right.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the 5 for dinner question, dead or alive, who are 5 people you'd want to have a meal with? And curious, I guess, if you'd have them individually or together.
Oh, I think I love to interview people and ask questions, so I feel like it might be on an individual basis. So Warren Buffett's on my list.
Warren Buffett. Why is that?
Yeah. I really appreciate his take on business and his take on time management, being an effective leader. Yeah.
He still lives in his Omaha, Nebraska house. Like, he just doesn't want to, doesn't live a lavish lifestyle. Like, seems like a simple, guy. So.
Yeah, I read an article about, you know, I don't go to those networking events. He's like, hate them. Even when he was younger, he's like, I don't pass out business cards. I don't, you know, no one talks to each other. Like, relationships are a big thing. And I'm big into relationships. And I've read some of his stuff and other communicators about the impact of, like, connecting with people and building relationships, which I think is very important. Next, I have Arlene Dickinson. So... from Dragon's Den, also an incredible communicator. She runs Venture Communications in Calgary and across Canada. I loved her book, Persuasion.
Yeah,
it was
I've
fantastic.
Read it. It's amazing, yeah.
Really great book. Really enjoyed that's something about this mutual benefit of communicating. I bring that to the table with all my clients. How can I make your problems mine, and how can we work together to come to some mutual benefit and just create something really great? And I think that flies in the face of the other dragons at the table. So really enjoy that.
And she highlights the benefits of relationships big time in that book. So
She really does.
Yeah.
She is a incredible
Mm-hmm.
communicator and marketer. I think because she created her own path, and that's what I find so fascinating. And I would just love to learn more about that path.
I feel like that one is definitely a possibility for you. I feel like I could see you having dinner with her one day. Have you
Oh,
met her before?
I have not. She spoke at Social West a couple years ago,
Okay.
so I got to see her talk
Yeah.
and kind of in person type
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But I just think her story is so
Yeah.
fantastic. But I would definitely like to collaborate with her
Mm.
company. I know they're looking for writers and stuff,
Mm.
so I better get on that.
Yeah.
Thank you for the
Yeah.
tip.
Yeah.
Maya Angelou, of course,
Yeah.
incredible,
Mm.
incredible, wise writer, one of the
Mm.
greatest writers of our time.
Mm.
I've read all of her books. I think that she's a fantastic. Her wisdom about being a woman, her
Mm.
wisdom about growing up in the United States and sharing the stories,
Mm.
Jim Crow era, just a reminder of what people have dealt with in North America, what
Yeah.
people have dealt with, and just an incredible, incredible storyteller
For sure.
for people to aspire to be. So I'd have a lot of writing
Mm.
questions for Miss Angelou. Brene Brown, she's a
Mm.
podcaster I listen to from Texas. She's great.
Yeah.
Interviews some great people. Talks about leadership. So I'm hoping to
Yeah.
channel a little bit of my inner Brene for the just demythifying brand podcast.
Mm.
So hopefully,
She's a
and
fantastic
yeah,
podcaster. Like she is really good at her interviews. I do love enjoy. I love listening to her. Yeah.
I really enjoy her podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned a lot about it, and the diversity of the people that she brings on. I just think that yeah, gets me
Mm-hmm.
thinking about different stuff.
Yeah.
Great, great. Would actually maybe love to interview her during dinner.
Mm.
And my last is Michelle Obama. I
Mm.
loved her books.
Yeah. Have you read the latest one?
Almost, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
What's that
So
one?
working.
What's that one like compared to Becoming?
Um, it's a little bit more future focused, I would
Okay.
say. Yeah. So Becoming is more like a
Yeah.
biography,
Yeah.
I would say. But what I'm finding is I just like the girl next door who became the first lady of the United States,
Mm.
and her life is just so
It
fascinating.
is. Yeah.
And the stories she tells, um, and leading into the next book, but all the advice that it's like as a result of that. So being authentically yourself and just
Mm-hmm.
going for it. And, easier said than done. But for her to be that person and actually see that in action is incredible. So huge fan. Huge fan. And that's it. I mean, I would have loved to have, Fran Lebowitz and Jody Wilson-Raybould and
Mm.
a bunch of other people at the
Mm.
table, but you only gave me five, so
Mm. Jody Wilson-Raybould. Yeah. You were
yeah.
you were you not pleased when she got kicked out of cabinet?
I was always I read her book as well. Very
Mm.
fascinated on her opinions about the role of government and the partisanship of government.
Mm.
I did work on an interview with her for the podcast festival, or sorry, LitFest, a
Mm.
couple years ago, and we got to interview her at her home
Wow.
in BC. Yeah, it was fantastic, and just talking a lot about authenticity. This is just keep coming up, and
Mm-hmm.
her ability to be able to and all MPs to be able to do what's best for their constituency as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
what's necessarily best for the party, and for parties to come together and vote on things that have a mutual benefit for citizens as opposed to just shooting something down because it's the
Yeah.
other parties. And I think that's opened up a big conversation about like what is the future of government and politics
Mm-hmm.
from the political side,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 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 Well, I'd love to talk to her. I think she'd be fascinating to. That's awesome that you get to interview
Yeah.
her. Did you get to see Michelle Obama when she came to Edmonton?
I did not.
Mm.
Yeah, I was out of town, but
Okay. We went to that show. It was pretty nice.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who interviewed her?
Robin River. What's her name? Robin Givens. Robin River.
Oh, right, right, right.
I forget her last name. She's on Good Morning America, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Last question. Besides Circle of Life, what do you know for sure?
Well, this is something I know for sure recently. It's not
Okay.
something I've always known to be true.
Yeah.
How hard you work is not as important as the impact you make.
How hard you work is not as important as the impact you make. Yeah. Love it.
So,
Sheri, thanks so much for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I remember, I can't remember how many years ago it was. I want to say maybe 2016. I remember being at a conference that we both were probably at our time at the province, and I remember you talking about social media and its emergence and the use of Twitter, and like that was only 7 years ago. Think about how much has changed since then. But I remember that talk could create a lasting impression about um, the use of digital tools, but also just an impression of you. And so I appreciate just having you on the podcast and being able to connect this way, and wish you a ton of good luck in the new podcast and your business and being that parent and all that. So thanks for making time for me today.
and thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. It
Good.
was nice to kind of have that full circle moment and talk about all the different things that have happened in the last 10 or 15 years. So
Yeah.
appreciate you inviting me.
That's awesome. We're going to put all of Sheri's information in our show notes, and like and subscribe and do all those great things, and check her Instagram page out and her business, and then her upcoming podcast on branding. And thanks again, Sheri. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you later. Bye.